On the evening of February 11th, 2026, the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives stood in the Capitol hallway and told reporters the situation was under control. He said the president was not upset. He said this would not change policy. He said the exercise was pointless. And then, while he was still speaking, the President of the United States posted 6 words on social media that made every Republican in Congress stop what they were doing. Any Republican who votes against tariffs will seriously suffer the consequences come election time. And that includes primaries. The message was clear. Cross me and I will end your career. But by the time that post went live, it was already too late. Because inside the House chamber, the vote had already happened. 219 to 211. 6 Republicans had broken ranks. They had joined every single Democrat in the chamber to pass a resolution that does something no Republican-led House has done in over a year. They voted to terminate the national emergency that the administration declared to justify tariffs on Canada. 25% tariffs on the closest ally the United States has. And for the first time since tariffs became the centerpiece of the administration's economic policy, the House, controlled by the president's own party, said no. Now let me be clear about something, because this is where most coverage of this story stops. The vote is symbolic. The president will veto it. There is no 2/3 majority to override that veto. And the Speaker told reporters exactly that. This changes nothing. But that analysis misses the point entirely, because this vote was never about passing a law. It was about what happened before the vote, what happened during the vote, and what it signals about what is coming next. And to understand that, you have to go back to Tuesday night. The night before the vote, Republican leadership tried to stop it from happening at all. They had a plan. For over a year, the Speaker had been using a procedural rule to block the House from even debating tariff resolutions. The rule effectively said, no member of Congress can force a vote on tariffs until we say so, and it had worked. For 12 months, despite growing frustration from both parties, the resolution introduced by the ranking Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee had been stuck. No debate. No floor time. No vote. But that rule was about to expire at the end of January. So leadership engineered a new one, the embedded language in a routine procedural vote that would extend the ban until the end of July 2026. 7 more months of silence. 7 more months of no congressional debate on the most consequential economic policy in a generation. And they needed every single Republican to vote yes. They got all but 3, a congressman from Kentucky, a congressman from California, and a congressman from Nebraska who was retiring at the end of his term. 3 votes, that is all it took. In a chamber where the majority holds 218 seats, losing 3 members on a procedural vote is enough to crack the dam. And the dam cracked. The moment that procedural vote failed on Tuesday night, the Speaker lost control of the floor. The tariff resolution was now eligible for debate, and the scramble began. Overnight, the White House launched what multiple news outlets described as an aggressive whip operation. Phone calls, meetings, offers. The congressman from Nebraska told reporters the White House tried to offer sweeteners for his state. His response, what about the other 49 states? He said he voted on principle. He said Congress is not a rubber stamp. And then he said something that revealed the real fault line inside the Republican caucus. He said he had spoken with many Republicans who agree with him, but who are afraid to say it publicly. From his vantage point, people feel like they are caught between a rock and a hard place, because they do not want to get on the bad side of the president. That is a sitting Republican congressman describing his own colleagues as too frightened to vote their conscience. And he estimated that as many as 30 Republicans would have crossed the aisle if the pressure had not been so intense. 30. By the time the gavel fell on Wednesday evening, the final number was 6. A congressman from Kentucky, who has long opposed executive overreach on trade. He did not frame his vote as anti-administration. He framed it as pro-constitution. He argued that Congress was surrendering its own authority and that leadership was using procedural tricks to prevent members from exercising it. A congressman from California who argued that leadership was trying to take control away from individual members. He said the purpose of a rule is to bring bills to the floor and set parameters for debate, not to sneak in unrelated language that expands the power of leadership at the expense of rank-and-file members. A congressman from Nebraska who said tariffs are a net negative for the economy and that farmers, manufacturers, and consumers are paying for them. He is retiring at the end of his term. He has nothing to lose. And when reporters asked whether the White House had tried to change his mind, he said yes, they offered incentives specifically for Nebraska. His answer was simple. What about the other 49 states? He told reporters he had spoken with colleagues who feel the same way but are too afraid to vote their conscience. He estimated as many as 30 Republicans would have crossed the aisle if the political consequences were not so severe. 30. That number matters. Because if 30 Republicans had voted yes instead of 6, the resolution would have passed with a margin so large that even a veto override would have been within reach. A congressman from Washington state who said tariffs have raised prices on fertilizer, equipment, and agricultural inputs across his district. He is also retiring. He told reporters that his state has one of the closest trade relationships with Canada of any state in the country, and that he was listening to his constituents, farmers, ranchers, small manufacturers who depend on cross-border supply chains that have existed for decades. A congressman from Colorado who said he looked at the Constitution and looked at the interests of his constituents and took the vote. When reporters asked whether he was worried about retaliation from the president, he said, "I do the right thing, and what the consequences are, we will have to see." And a congressman from Pennsylvania who represents one of the most competitive swing districts in the country. His vote was the most politically dangerous of all 6. He's not retiring. He will face voters in November. And he voted against the president's signature economic policy anyway. That is not a protest vote from someone with nothing to lose. That is a calculation that the political ground is shifting. 6 members, 6 different states, 6 different reasons. But one common thread. Each of them decided that the cost of staying silent was higher than the cost of crossing the president. Now here is where the story gets structural. The legal foundation for these tariffs is a law passed in 1977 called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA. That law was written to give presidents the ability to respond to genuine national emergencies, sanctions against hostile nations, asset freezes during crises, trade restrictions during wartime. It was never designed to impose sweeping tariffs on the closest trading partner of the United States. But in early 2025, the administration declared a national emergency based on the flow of fentanyl from Canada. And under that emergency declaration, they imposed 25% tariffs on all Canadian goods. All goods, every sector, every product. The justification was national security. But according to law enforcement data, the overwhelming majority of fentanyl entering the United States is produced by cartels in Mexico and smuggled across land crossings in California and Arizona. Canada is a source, but a minor one compared to the southern border. And yet the tariffs on Canada were imposed at the same rate. And this is the legal question that is now sitting before the Supreme Court of the United States. The case is called VOS Selections versus the Administration. It was argued on November 5th, 2025. Both the Court of International Trade and the Federal Circuit have already ruled that IEPA does not authorize the president to impose tariffs. 2 courts, 2 rulings against the administration. And the Supreme Court took the case on an expedited schedule. Oral arguments just 57 days after granting review, compared to the normal timeline of 100 to 120 days. During those oral arguments, the justices pressed the administration to provide a single example in statutory history where the word regulate means the same thing as the word tax. The administration could not provide one. Multiple justices raised the major questions doctrine, the principle that if Congress wants to delegate authority over issues of vast economic significance, it must do so clearly and explicitly. IEPA says the president may regulate importation. It does not say the president may tax importation. That distinction is the hinge on which the entire case turns. And the conventional wisdom after the hearing was that a majority of justices were skeptical. But skeptical is not the same as unanimous. At least one justice appeared sympathetic to the administration, arguing that emergency power statutes are deliberately written in broad language. That was over 3 months ago, and the justices still have not ruled. 91 days of silence. Legal analysts say the delay suggests a deeply divided court, likely producing multiple opinions. A majority, a dissent, and possibly 1 or more concurrences. The court has been on recess. Their next scheduled session to release opinions is February 20th, 4 days from now. And the Treasury Secretary himself has acknowledged what happens if the administration loses. He called it a mishmash and said the administration has at least 3 other legal authorities it could use to reimpose tariffs. But he also admitted that losing IEEPA would cost the president flexibility. And flexibility is exactly what this tariff policy has relied on from the beginning. Here is why this matters. If the Supreme Court rules that IEEPA does not authorize tariffs, the legal foundation for every tariff imposed under this emergency declaration collapses, not just on Canada, on every country targeted under IEEPA. Importers have already filed hundreds of protective lawsuits seeking refunds on tariffs they have paid. The government has collected approximately $195 billion in tariff revenue in fiscal 2025 and another $62 billion so far in 2026. If those tariffs are ruled illegal, the question of refunds becomes one of the largest financial liabilities the federal government has faced in decades. The Treasury Secretary has acknowledged this. He said the administration has at least 3 other legal authorities it could use to reimpose tariffs, Section 232, Section 301, and Section 338. But reimposing tariffs under different legal authority takes time. There would be a gap, and in that gap, the entire trade architecture shifts. Now zoom out. The House vote on February 11th did not happen in a vacuum. It happened 5 days before the CUSMA trade agreement review begins to loom. July 1st, 2026. Less than 5 months away. All three North American partners, the United States, Canada, and Mexico, must agree to extend the agreement for another 16 years. If they do not, annual reviews begin, and the agreement expires in 2036. 90% of Canadian goods currently enter the United States tariff-free under CUSMA. If that framework collapses, every Canadian export faces the full tariff wall. Auto parts that cross the border up to 8 times before a single vehicle is assembled would become unviable. Canadian energy that fuels 20% of American electricity would be subject to duties. The aluminum in American fighter aircraft, the lumber in American housing, everything changes, and American consumers pay the price. According to Democrats on Congress's Joint Economic Committee, the tariffs have already cost the average American household almost $1,200 in the first 10 months alone. 60% of Americans disapprove of the tariff increases, according to the Pew Research Center. Only 37% approve. And even among Republicans, 1/3, 33%, told Marquette Law School pollsters that the Supreme Court should limit the president's tariff authority. 1/3 of his own party's voters. The congressman from Nebraska suggested that up to 30 House Republicans would have voted against the tariffs if the political pressure had not been so extreme. The Senate has already passed similar resolutions. Once in April, once in October of last year, with Republican senators from Maine, Kentucky, and Alaska crossing the aisle. The next vote in the House will be on tariffs against Mexico. The Democrats have unlocked the procedural mechanism to force these votes one after another on country after country for the rest of the session. Every swing district Republican will have to go on the record. Every one of them will have to choose between the president's social media threats and the voters in their district who are paying higher prices on groceries, lumber, fuel, and farm equipment. And here is the part that makes this personal. If you live in a border state, Michigan, New York, Washington, Ohio, Minnesota, you are already feeling this. The price of lumber has gone up. The price of heating fuel has gone up. The price of every product that contains Canadian components has gone up. And those price increases do not show up on a bill that says tariff. They show up at the grocery store, at the hardware store, at the gas pump. They are invisible taxes embedded in the cost of daily life. And most people have no idea where those price increases are coming from. And the midterm elections are 9 months away. The Ontario Premier called the House vote an important victory with more work ahead. He thanked lawmakers from both parties who stood up for free trade, and he was not the only one watching. The European Union has been tracking the IEEPA case and the congressional rebellion closely, because the same emergency powers used to impose tariffs on Canada have been used to impose tariffs on Europe. If those powers fall in court, Europe benefits too. Mexico is watching because the next forced vote in the House will target tariffs on Mexican goods. The same procedural mechanism that unlocked the Canada vote applies to Mexico. And the same swing district pressure applies, possibly even more, because American supply chains with Mexico are even larger than with Canada. Japan and South Korea are watching because both countries face tariffs imposed under the same legal authority. And both countries are in the middle of renegotiating their own trade relationships with the United States. What happened on the House floor on February 11th was not just an American domestic story. It was a signal to every trading partner on Earth that the political consensus behind these tariffs is not as strong as it appears. And the Canadian government, which has spent the past year building alternative trade partnerships with Europe, Mexico, and the Pacific nations, now has something it did not have before. Evidence that the American system itself is pushing back. Not from the outside, from the inside. From members of the president's own party in the president's own chamber, voting against the president's signature policy, while the president watched in real time and threatened to destroy their careers. The vote will not become law. The veto will hold. The tariffs will stay in place for now, but the fracture is visible, and fractures, once visible, do not heal under pressure. They widen. The Supreme Court ruling is expected within weeks. If it strikes down IEEPA tariffs, the legal foundation for the entire trade policy collapses overnight. If it upholds them, the political fight moves to Congress and to the ballot box. Either way, the status quo is no longer stable. The CUSMA review begins in months. The midterm elections arrive in November. The next forced House vote, this time on Mexico, is already being drafted. And 6 Republicans just showed the world that the wall of support is not as solid as it looks. The question is no longer whether the cracks exist. The question is how fast they spread. To understand what happens next, the court ruling, the trade review, the election pressure, make sure you are following this channel. Because the next vote is already being prepared. And the next one will be harder to survive.